Welcome to EduCentials, where we don't just revise, we master. This is a complete A-star revision course for Shakespeare's Othello. We're going to cover everything you need for Section B of AQA English, including context, dramatic methods, characters, themes, symbols, critical perspectives, exam technique, and model responses. The aim is not simply to revise the play, but to understand how Shakespeare creates meaning, and how examiners reward sophisticated analysis. By the end of this session, you should have a clear framework for approaching almost any Othello question with confidence. Before we dive into the text, let's remind ourselves what the exam actually requires. Section B is worth 45 marks and should take around 55 minutes. You choose one question from a choice of two and write about both the extract and the wider play. This is crucial. Responses that remain trapped within the extract are heavily limited. The examiner wants to see connections across multiple scenes. AO2 is the biggest assessment objective, meaning analysis of methods should drive your essay. Context should be embedded naturally rather than added as an afterthought. Think of your response as an argument that moves across the whole play rather than a commentary on one moment. Understanding context means understanding the world Shakespeare was writing into. Othello was first performed in 1604 during the height of Shakespeare's tragic period. It was written for an audience living in a society obsessed with hierarchy, honour, religion and race. Shakespeare's decision to make a black African man the tragic hero was remarkable because stage Moors were often presented as villains. The contrast between Venice and Cyprus is equally important. Venice represents law, civilization and structure, while Cyprus represents instability, isolation and danger. As the setting shifts, so too does Othello's ability to maintain control over himself and his world. One of the most important contextual ideas in Othello is honour culture. In early modern society, a wife's fidelity was closely linked to her husband's reputation. Jealousy was not viewed as a private emotion, but as a threat to social identity. Shakespeare's audience would have understood why accusations of adultery carried such devastating consequences. This slide also introduces Shakespeare's source material, Cinthio's Italian novella. Shakespeare deliberately changes aspects of the original story to make Othello more sympathetic and the tragedy more powerful. By naming Othello, deepening Iago's complexity and altering the ending, Shakespeare transforms a simple cautionary tale into a profound human tragedy. This slide introduces two of the most important dramatic methods in the play. First, Shakespearean tragedy follows a recognisable pattern involving hamartia, peripeteia, anagnorisis, catastrophe and catharsis. Othello's journey fits this model remarkably well. Second, Shakespeare uses form to reveal character psychology. Othello begins the play speaking in controlled and dignified blank verse, reflecting his confidence and authority. However, as jealousy takes hold, that control begins to fracture. By Act 4, his speech descends into broken prose. This shift is not accidental. Shakespeare uses language structure itself to dramatise Othello's psychological collapse. Much of the play's power comes from what the audience knows that the characters do not. Iago's soliloquies and asides allow us direct access to his schemes, creating constant dramatic irony. We watch Othello trust a man we know cannot be trusted. Shakespeare reinforces this through recurring imagery. Animal imagery reduces people to instinct and appetite. Poison imagery presents language as something infectious and destructive. Light and darkness create moral and racial tensions throughout the play, while military language reflects Othello's dependence on his identity as a soldier. These imagery patterns are not isolated examples. Together they form a network of meanings running through the entire tragedy. Some objects in literature are symbolic. In Othello, two objects become the tragedy itself. The handkerchief is the only piece of evidence Othello ever receives. Yet it is completely manipulated. Shakespeare uses it to question whether evidence can ever truly reveal the truth. The bed in Act 5 is equally significant. It begins as a symbol of marriage but becomes a place of death. Desdemona dies there, Emilia dies there, and Othello dies there. Shakespeare deliberately merges love and destruction, intimacy and violence. The wedding bed becomes a grave, creating one of the most disturbing images in all of Shakespearean tragedy. At the heart of the play stand two extraordinary characters. Othello is both a heroic military leader and a vulnerable outsider. His achievements are impressive, yet his sense of belonging remains fragile. Iago recognises this vulnerability and exploits it relentlessly. What makes Iago so fascinating is that Shakespeare never provides a single convincing motive. Instead, we are given multiple possible explanations, none of which fully satisfy. Some critics have described him as an embodiment of motiveless evil. Importantly, Iago speaks more than Othello, allowing him to dominate the dramatic narrative. In many ways, he becomes the playwright within the play itself. The women of Othello are often underestimated, but they are central to the play's meaning. Desdemona challenges patriarchal expectations through her marriage to Othello, yet remains loyal and compassionate throughout the tragedy. Emilia develops into the moral conscience of the play, exposing the injustice of a society that blames women for male failings. Cassio represents honour and reputation, while Roderigo illustrates the dangers of manipulation. Brabantio embodies patriarchal authority, and Bianca offers a fascinating parallel to Othello's jealousy. Together, these characters enrich the play's exploration of power, gender, loyalty, and deception. The first two acts establish the foundations of the tragedy. Act 1 introduces the marriage between Othello and Desdemona, the racism directed towards Othello, and Iago's declaration of hatred. Significantly, Othello successfully defends himself before the Senate, demonstrating his dignity and eloquence. Act 2 initially appears more positive. The Turkish threat disappears, and Othello's reunited with Desdemona. However, Shakespeare quickly undermines this sense of security. Iago engineers Cassio's downfall through alcohol and violence, setting in motion the chain of events that will ultimately destroy every major character. These acts establish both the happiness that is possible and the catastrophe that's coming. If there is one scene every Othello student must know inside out, it is Act 3, Scene 3. This is the temptation scene, the moment where the entire tragedy changes direction. Up until now, Othello has trusted Desdemona completely. Iago never directly accuses her of infidelity. Instead, he relies on suggestion, hesitation, and implication. Phrases like, "Ha, I like not that," force Othello to create his own suspicions. Shakespeare presents manipulation as a collaborative act. Iago provides the seed, but Othello waters it. By the end of the scene, Othello has transformed from loving husband into potential avenger, and the tragedy becomes unstoppable. Acts 4 and 5 show the consequences of Iago's success. Othello's language collapses into fragmented prose, reflecting his psychological breakdown. He publicly humiliates Desdemona, interprets innocence as guilt, and becomes consumed by jealousy. The final act takes place in the bedchamber, transforming a private domestic space into the site of tragedy. Othello murders Desdemona, believing he is delivering justice. Emilia then exposes the truth, revealing the devastating consequences of deception. Shakespeare ensures that recognition comes too late. Othello finally understands reality, but only after destroying the person he loved most. This is what makes the ending so tragic. The beauty of Othello is that almost every exam question can be linked back to a small number of central themes. Jealousy drives the plot. Race shapes Othello's identity and vulnerability. Reputation influences nearly every major decision. Appearance and reality create uncertainty throughout the play. Authority is constantly challenged, whether by Desdemona, Iago, or Emilia. Finally, military identity defines Othello's sense of self. These themes do not operate separately. They overlap and reinforce one another, creating the complex web of ideas that makes Othello such a rich text for analysis. Symbols are one of the easiest ways to elevate your analysis because they connect individual scenes to the play as a whole. The handkerchief symbolises both love and false evidence. The bed unites marriage and death. The willow song foreshadows Desdemona's fate. Light and darkness operate as both moral and racial symbols. Animal imagery reduces characters to instinct and appetite. Poison imagery reflects Iago's methods, while storms mirror emotional turmoil. The key point is that these motifs recur repeatedly. Shakespeare uses them to build patterns of meaning that extend far beyond individual quotations. Critical perspectives offer different ways of understanding the play. A post-colonial reading focuses on Othello as a racial outsider who is accepted only conditionally by Venetian society. A feminist reading highlights the vulnerability of women within a patriarchal culture. A psychoanalytic reading explores jealousy, repression, and unconscious fears. A performance perspective examines how casting choices shape audience responses. Finally, a tragic reading focuses on Othello's downfall as a classical tragic hero. The strongest essays often combine perspectives rather than relying on just one, demonstrating that great literature supports multiple interpretations simultaneously. One of the quickest ways to improve your marks is to become more precise with terminology. Instead of relying on vague comments about tone or imagery, name the language level you're analysing. Is Shakespeare using lexis, semantics, grammar, pragmatics, or discourse? Is he creating meaning through iambic pentameter, blank verse, dramatic irony, or a speech act? Examiners reward precision because it demonstrates control and confidence. You do not need to overload your essay with terminology, but every paragraph should include at least one clearly identified method that helps explain how Shakespeare shapes meaning. Every Othello question follows a similar structure, which means every Othello answer can follow a similar strategy. First, identify the extract location. Next, underline the key focus of the question. Then remember that how refers to methods and why refers to meanings and effects. Finally, pay attention to the phrase different points in the play. This is the examiner's way of telling you to move beyond the extract. A strong essay begins with close analysis, expands into wider discussion, introduces a complication or alternative perspective, and then finishes with a catastrophe in Act 5. This structure naturally creates a sophisticated argument. Jealousy is arguably the defining emotion of the play, making it an excellent practice question. Notice that Shakespeare does not present jealousy as simply an individual weakness. Instead, he presents it as something contagious. Iago spreads jealousy through suggestion, language, and manipulation. Othello becomes infected by it, but Bianca also demonstrates jealous behaviour. This is important because it prevents us from seeing jealousy as uniquely Othello's flaw. Shakespeare suggests that jealousy is produced by social pressures, insecurities, and relationships. When planning an essay, always trace the theme across multiple scenes rather than focusing on one isolated moment. This slide demonstrates what high-level analytical writing looks like. Notice that the exemplar does not begin with plot summary. Instead, it immediately focuses on methods, meaning and interpretation. It explores metaphor, animal imagery, pragmatics, and dramatic structure while maintaining a clear argument. This is exactly what examiners want to see. Alongside the exemplar is a bank of essential quotations. Rather than memorising dozens of quotes, focus on a smaller number that can be adapted to multiple themes. A handful of well-understood quotations is far more valuable than a long list remembered without analysis. As the exam approaches, your goal is not to learn everything. Your goal is to consolidate what you already know. Reread the most important scenes, Act 1, Scene 3, Act 3, Scene 3, and Act 5, Scene 2. Revise a small set of flexible quotations. Practice one timed introduction or paragraph. On the day of the exam, read both questions carefully before choosing. Move beyond the extract. Embed context naturally, and make sure every paragraph contains clear analysis of methods. Above all, trust your preparation. The final message of this slide is the perfect revision mantra. Name the level, embed the quote, and move beyond the extract.